Hi, and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. My world is a language spoken by the earth. I am a winemaker, a translator of sun, rain, and soil into a story that can be held in a glass. My name is Silas, and my life is measured in vintages, in the slow, patient, and sometimes heartbreaking conversation between the land and the vine. The concept of terroir is central to my craft. It is the belief that every wine is an expression of a specific place. The minerals in the soil, the angle of the sun, the soft, persistent kiss of the morning fog, all of it becomes part of the final, complex truth of the wine. For 18 years, I believed my life had the perfect terroir. It was here, in this small, sun-drenched valley, on a piece of land that sloped gently towards a meandering river. My hands, stained with the permanent purple of the grape harvest, had turned this land from a wild, overgrown pasture into a thriving vineyard. And the heart of this terroir, the very soul of my world, was my family. My wife, Isolde, was a force of nature, as vibrant and as essential as the sun itself. And our son, Rowan, was the fruit of that vine, the living, breathing purpose of all my labor. I loved him with a totality that was terrifying, a love that was as deep and as complex as the root system of my oldest vines. The day Rowan was born, I did something that winemakers have done for centuries. I selected the best grapes from that year's harvest, from a small, protected parcel of land we called the Heart, and I set them aside. I crushed them myself with my own hands. I fermented them with the wild yeasts that lived on their skins. I aged the wine in a single, perfect barrel of French oak. It was to be the Cuvée Rowan, a wine that would sleep and dream and mature alongside my son. The plan, the beautiful, simple plan, was to open it on his 18th birthday. It was to be a celebration, a sacrament, a story and a bottle of the year he came into the world, a story of the terroir that had made him. I was a happy man. My life was hard, the work was relentless, but it was an honest life, a good life. We were not wealthy, but the vineyard provided. We had our home, we had our land, and we had each other. Our happiness was also supported by the presence of our neighbor, Cornac. He was a wealthy man who had made his fortune in the city and had retired to the valley for a life of quiet luxury. He owned the vast estate that bordered our small vineyard. He had been a friend, a mentor, and in many ways, a savior. When we were first starting out, struggling to make ends meet, it was Cormac who had co-signed the loan that allowed us to buy this land. It was Cormac who had offered his advice, his equipment, his unwavering neighborly support. He was a constant, benevolent presence in our lives, a kind of surrogate uncle to Rowan, always ready with a story or a small, thoughtful gift. He was part of our terroir. The day the terroir of my life was revealed to be a lie, it began not with a storm, but with a simple, clinical fact. Rowan was 7 years old, a wild, beautiful boy with a spirit as bright as his mother's and a mop of unruly dark hair. He had a fall from a treehouse I had built for him, a nasty break in his arm that required a trip to the hospital and a small routine surgery to set the bone. I was in the pre-op room with him and Isolde, trying to be the calm, reassuring father, while my own heart was a frantic, trapped bird. The nurse came in to do the final checks. She was a kind, middle-aged woman with tired eyes. She was confirming his information. Rowan Blackwood, she said, reading from the chart. Date of birth, August 14th. Blood type, AB negative. I nodded. Isolde nodded. And then my brain, the slow, methodical part of me that was not consumed with panic for my son, processed the last two words. AB negative. A small, cold, perfectly formed stone of impossibility dropped into the pit of my stomach. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice sounding strange and distant. "Can you repeat that? His blood type?" The nurse looked at me, a little confused. "AB negative," she repeated, pointing to the chart. It was on his birth records. My own blood type is O positive. It is the most common blood type in the world. It is also, from a genetic standpoint, a very simple, very absolute one. A person with type O blood carries no A or B antigens. It is genetically impossible for a type O parent to have a child with type AB blood. The laws of genetics are as immutable and as unforgiving as the laws of physics. A bridge with a flawed design will collapse. A parent with type O blood cannot produce a child with type AB blood. It is a simple, biological, and undeniable fact. The room, with its cheerful cartoon animal wallpaper, began to feel like it was tilting on its axis. The sound of the beeping machines, a sound so familiar from my own father's final days, seemed to grow louder, to fill my head. I looked at Isolde. She was not looking at me. She was staring at the chart in the nurse's hand, her face a pale, frozen mask of utter, complete panic. And in that moment, in the sterile, fluorescent light of that hospital room, I saw it. The tale, the crack in the facade, the truth. Rowan, my son, the boy whose every breath was the reason for my own, the boy for whom I had created a special, sacred vintage, was not my son. A torrent of images, of memories flooded my mind, all of them now recontextualized in the harsh, devastating light of this new knowledge. Cormac, with his easy charm, his constant presence, his generous loan. Cormac, whose blood type I did not know, but whose face I could suddenly, with a sickening clarity, see in the bone structure of my son's face. The way they both had a slight cleft in their chin. The way their eyes crinkled in the exact same way when they laughed. The data points had always been there. I had just refused, out of a desperate, loving blindness, to ever see the pattern they formed. The nurse, oblivious to the quiet, cataclysmic detonation that had just occurred, finished her checks and left the room. We were alone. Me, Isolde, and our son, who was not my son.
The silence in the room was absolute. I looked at her, and she finally, slowly, raised her eyes to meet mine. In them, I saw not defiance, not anger. I saw a profound, bottomless wail of guilt and a terrified, pleading sorrow. She didn't have to say a word. Her silence was a confession. Her panic was an admission. The man of reason in me, the engineer who used to be, wanted to see the blueprint of the lie. The husband wanted to scream, to rage, to demand an accounting of this catastrophic, foundational betrayal. But the father, the man I had become, did something else. I looked at Rowan, my beautiful 7-year-old boy, his face pale with fear about the impending surgery, and I knew, with an absolute, gut-wrenching certainty, that I could not, would not destroy his world. His arm was broken. I would not allow his life to be broken too, not today. So I did the hardest thing I have ever done. I swallowed the truth. I packed it down, deep into a cold, dark cellar in my soul. I walked over to my son. I took his small, uninjured hand in mine, and I smiled. A perfect, believable, and utterly false smile of a loving, unworried father. "You're going to be so brave, buddy," I said, my voice a perfect imitation of my own. "When you wake up, we'll have ice cream, and your mom and I will be right here." Isolde was staring at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and a dawning fragile hope. She had been braced for the explosion. She had been waiting for the collapse. She had no idea that I was an expert in load-bearing structures. She had no idea that I had just made the decision to take the entire, unendurable weight of this lie onto my own shoulders, and to carry it, silently, for as long as was necessary. The surgery was a success. Rowan's arm was set. We took him home. And our life, on the surface, continued. But beneath the surface, everything had changed. I had made a decision in that hospital room, a quiet, internal vow. I would raise this boy as my own. I would love him, protect him, and be the best father I could possibly be. I would not punish him for the sins of his mother. But the truth, I knew, was like a wine. Some truths are meant to be consumed young, fresh, and raw. Others need to be aged, to be cellared, to be allowed to mature in the darkness until they are ready. until the person who is to drink it is ready. This truth, this terrible, vintage truth, I would sell her. I would keep it locked away, and I would wait. I would wait until the day my son was a man, the day he turned 18, the day we were scheduled to open the Cuvée Rowan. And on that day, I would serve him the story of the year he was born, the full, complex, and bitter truth of the terroir that had made him. The wait had begun. The 11 years that followed my discovery in the hospital were a long, slow lesson in the art of living a lie. My life, which had once been a single coherent narrative, was now a split screen. On one side was the life everyone saw, the life of Silas, the quiet, dedicated winemaker, the loving husband and father. On the other side was the secret, silent life of a man who was a ghost in his own family, an actor playing a role in a play where only he knew the tragic ending. Every day was a performance. Every shared meal, every family holiday, every casual conversation was a scene that required a level of focus and discipline that was more exhausting than the most grueling harvest. I had to be two people at once, the man who loved his wife and the man who knew his wife had betrayed him in the most fundamental way imaginable, the man who adored his son and the man who knew, every time he looked at him, that he was looking at the living, breathing evidence of that betrayal. My relationship with Isolde became a masterpiece of unspoken agreements. She knew that I knew. I knew that she knew. But we never, ever spoke of it. The terrible truth sat between us, a massive, invisible object on our dining room table, a ghost in our bed. Her guilt was a constant, palpable presence. She became a better wife than she had ever been. She was more attentive, more affectionate, more supportive. Her love for me took on a desperate, penitent quality. She was trying, in 1,000 small, silent ways, to atone for the one great, unforgivable sin. I accepted her affection. I played the part of the husband who was being loved. But inside, I was a hollow, empty space. Her touch, which had once been my greatest comfort, now felt like a brand, a constant reminder of the lie we were living. Her love was not a gift. It was a payment on a debt she could never fully repay. Cormac remained a part of our lives, an agonizing, unavoidable fixture in our landscape. He was the benevolent, charming neighbor, the Uncle Cormac who would show up with expensive birthday gifts for Rowan, who would offer his sage advice on everything from cars to girls. He was utterly, blissfully ignorant that I knew the truth. He saw me as his friend, the simple, lucky winemaker who had the family he, a wealthy, perpetual bachelor, had never had. The irony was a poison I had to swallow every time he clapped me on the shoulder, every time he praised me for what a natural father I was. I had to sit at my own table, drink his expensive wine, and listen to the man who had fathered my son talk about the weather. The effort it took to maintain my composure, to smile, to make small talk, was a feat of emotional engineering that left me drained and hollow for days afterward. But the center of my world, the one true, uncorrupted thing in the wreckage of my life, was Rowan. My love for him was not a performance. It was real, it was absolute, and it grew deeper, more complex with each passing year.
He was not a symbol of Isolde's betrayal. He was just my son. I was the one who taught him how to prune a vine. I was the one who sat up with him all night when he had a fever. I was the one who helped him with his history homework, who taught him how to drive, who had the awkward, fumbling conversation with him about girls. My life as a father was not a lie. It was the only truth I had left. But even that truth was tainted. Every time he would achieve something, every time he would make me proud, I would see Cormac's face for a fleeting, sickening moment in his. When Rowan won the regional science fair with a project on soil chemistry, it was Cormac who threw him a celebratory barbecue at his sprawling estate. When Rowan showed a surprising natural talent for finance, a talent he most certainly did not inherit from me, it was Cormac who offered to mentor him, to help him manage his first small stock portfolio. Cormac was not trying to be a father. He was just being the man he was, generous, confident, and utterly unaware of the damage he was inflicting. He was a shadow father, a genetic ghost, and his presence was a constant, low-grade hum of pain in my life. Isolde watched these interactions with a quiet, terrified anxiety. I could see the fear in her eyes, the fear that I would snap, that I would finally say something, that the fragile, silent truce we had maintained for so long would shatter. But I never did. My patience was a form of power. My silence was my shield and my weapon. I was a winemaker. I understood the art of the long, slow fermentation. I knew that some things could not be rushed. My rage, my grief, my profound sense of injustice, I did not bury these emotions. I channeled them. I poured them into the earth. I became a better winemaker than I had ever been. My vineyard, which had once been a source of simple, honest pride, became my confessional, my therapy, my monastery. I worked with a ferocious, obsessive focus. I learned every contour of my land, every nuance of its soil. The vines were the only living things to whom I could tell the truth. I would whisper my secrets to them as I tended them in the pre-dawn mist, and they, in turn, responded. My wines, which had always been good, became exceptional. They developed a new depth, a new complexity, a new, almost human character. Critics began to take notice. Small, prestigious restaurants began to feature my wines on their lists. My quiet little vineyard was becoming something more. And at the heart of it all, in the coolest, darkest corner of my cellar, was the single sleeping barrel of the Cuvée Rowan. It was the vessel of my vow. Once a year, on his birthday, I would perform a ritual. I would take a small sample from the barrel with a wine thief, and I would taste it. I would analyze its development, its maturation. The wine was a living, breathing chronicle of the lie. In its early years, it was raw, aggressive, full of sharp, untamed tannins, like my own initial raw-boned rage. As the years went on, it softened. The tannins resolved, the flavors deepened. It developed notes of dark, bitter cherry, of earth, of something that tasted like a profound, almost sorrowful wisdom. The wine was maturing, and so, I hoped, was my son. As Rowan entered his late teens, the end of my long, silent vigil was in sight. He was a good kid. He was smart, kind, and he was beginning to think about his future. A future that, I knew, would be shaped and defined by the truth I was about to give him. The preparations for his 18th birthday party began. It was to be a big celebration, a gathering of all the friends and family who had watched him grow up. Isolde threw herself into the planning with a frantic, almost desperate energy. She was planning a party, but she was also, I knew, bracing for a judgment. And Cormac, of course, was a central part of the celebration. He had offered his beautiful, sprawling garden as the venue. He was the benevolent patron, the proud uncle, the man who had no idea he was about to be the guest of honor at his own long-delayed paternity hearing. The week before the party, I went down to the cellar. It was time. The wine in the barrel had done its work. It had aged. It was ready. I carefully siphoned the dark, ruby-colored liquid into 30 pristine, unlabeled bottles. Then I corked them and I sealed them with a plain, black wax capsule. The Cuvée Rowan was born. It was not just a wine. It was a statement. It was a verdict. It was 18 years of my silence, of my pain, of my love, of my sacrifice, all distilled into a single, beautiful, and potentially devastating vintage. I held one of the bottles in my hand. It felt heavy. It felt alive. I had spent 11 years waiting for this moment, and now that it was here, I was not filled with a sense of triumphant revenge. I was filled with a deep, profound, and terrifying sense of dread. The truth, like a wine, can be a beautiful and a terrible thing.
It can be enlightening and it can be intoxicating, and sometimes it can be a poison. I had no idea what it would do to my son. I only knew that the cork was about to be pulled, and the story, my story, was about to be poured. The week leading up to Rowan's birthday party was a masterclass in surreal domestic theater. Our small house, usually a place of quiet, functional routine, became a whirlwind of preparation. Isolde was a dervish of activity, her movements sharp and brittle with a nervous energy that was almost palpable. She was not just planning a party, she was meticulously arranging the stage set for the final act of a play she had been performing in for almost 2 decades. She consulted with me on every detail: the caterer, the music, the guest list, her voice a high, thin wire of forced cheerfulness. She was seeking my approval, my collaboration, my complicity in this final grand performance of our happy normal family. And I gave it to her. I was a calm, steady, and helpful partner. I tasted the canapés. I approved the playlist. I was the co-director of my own execution, or rather, the execution of the life we had pretended to have. Each planning session was a new, fresh hell. Cormac was a constant presence, striding over from his estate with suggestions, with offers of help. He was in his element, the generous, benevolent patriarch. "Don't worry about the marquee, Silas," he would boom, clapping me on the shoulder, his touch a casual, proprietary gesture that sent a jolt of ice-cold fury through my veins. "My guys will handle it. And I've ordered a few cases of the champagne Rowan likes. The boy has expensive taste, eh?" He would laugh, a big, hearty, oblivious sound. And I would have to laugh with him. I would have to stand there and thank him for his generosity, for his kindness, for his paternal interest in the boy who was his son.
The effort it took to keep the mask of the grateful friend in place was a physical strain. I would end each day with a tension headache so profound it felt like my skull was in a vice. My nights were sleepless. I would lie in bed next to Isolde, her breathing a soft, steady rhythm in the darkness, and I would be consumed by the enormity of what I was about to do. Was it the right thing? The question echoed in the silent chambers of my mind. For 11 years, my silence had been a shield, a way to protect Rowan from a truth I believed would destroy him. Now, I was about to turn that shield into a sword. I had told myself that I was waiting for him to be a man, for him to be old enough, strong enough to handle the truth. But was that the real reason? Or was I just a coward, a man who had chosen the long, slow, quiet agony of a lie over the short, brutal, and unpredictable violence of the truth? Was this an act of paternal love, or was it the ultimate act of selfish, long-delayed revenge? I did not have an answer. I only had the relentless forward momentum of a plan that had been set in motion more than a decade ago. The truth, I had decided, was not a choice. It was a debt that had to be paid, a harvest that had to be brought in, no matter how bitter the fruit. My only real conversation during that week was with Rowan. He was on the cusp of his own life, a young man about to leave for college, his future a bright, open horizon. He was excited about the party, but also a little embarrassed by the fuss, the way teenagers are. He found me one evening in the cellar, where I was affixing the simple, handwritten labels to the bottles of the cuvée Rowan. The labels did not say the name of the vineyard. They said only Rowan and the vintage, the year of his birth. "That's it?" he asked, picking up a bottle, his young face, a face that was a heartbreaking fusion of his mother's beauty and Cormac's bone structure, reflected in the dark glass. "The famous wine you've been talking about my whole life?" "That's it," I said, my voice quiet. "It's not about a fancy label, it's about what's inside." He looked at me, a thoughtful, serious expression in his eyes. He had grown into a fine young man. He was intelligent, he was kind, he was everything a father could hope for. And in that moment, the love I felt for him was so pure, so overwhelming, that it almost broke me. The thought of inflicting pain on him, of shattering the stable, loving world I had so carefully constructed for him, was a physical agony. "You know, Dad," he said, his voice a little hesitant, "I know you and Mom. I know things have been quiet between you for a long time, but I want you to know I'm grateful for both of you, for everything. I know it hasn't always been easy." He didn't know the half of it. He thought he was talking about the quiet, emotional distance of a long-term marriage. He had no idea he was talking about a lie of almost geological proportions. I put my hand on his shoulder. "Being your father," I said, and my voice was thick with an emotion I could not hide, "is the only thing that has ever been easy, Rowan." It was the truest thing I had said in 11 years. The night before the party, a storm rolled in, a fierce, unseasonal tempest that lashed the valley with wind and rain. I stood on the porch of our small house, watching the lightning fork across the dark, bruised sky. It felt appropriate, a reflection of the storm that was gathering in my own soul. Isolde came and stood beside me. She was a silhouette in the doorway, a ghost in the house we had built together. "It's a bad one," she said softly. "I hope it doesn't ruin the party." "It will pass," I said, my gaze fixed on the storm. "It always does." We stood there in silence for a long time, the only sound the roar of the wind and the drumming of the rain on the tin roof. And in that silence, in the charged electric air of the storm, I felt a subtle shift. The dynamic that had defined our lives for a decade, the dynamic of her guilt and my silent judgment, seemed to fall away, leaving something else in its place. A profound, shared, and unspoken sadness. We were two people who had once loved each other, who had built a life together, and who were now standing on the precipice of its final, inevitable end. "Silas," she said, her voice so quiet I could barely hear it over the storm, "whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know I am sorry for everything." It was the closest she had ever come to a confession. It was an admission, a plea, a surrender. The old me, the man who had been so deeply wounded, might have seized on that moment. He might have demanded the full, ugly, detailed truth. But the man I was now, the man who had been aged and weathered by a decade of silent grief, just nodded. I did not look at her. "I know, Isolde," I said. "I know." The storm broke just before dawn. The morning of Rowan's 18th birthday dawned clear and bright and unnaturally beautiful. The air was washed clean, the world glistening and new. It was a perfect day for a celebration. It was a perfect day for a reckoning. The guests began to arrive in the late afternoon. Cormac's garden was a beautiful setting, the flowers vibrant, the lawn a perfect emerald green. The marquee was up, white and pristine against the blue sky. There was music, laughter, the clinking of glasses. It was a perfect party, a perfect illusion. I moved through the crowd, a ghost at my own son's celebration. I smiled, I shook hands, I accepted the congratulations and the compliments. But I was not really there. I was in a state of extreme, almost out-of-body detachment. I was an engineer, watching a complex system approach its predetermined point of failure. I watched Isolde, a vision in a summer dress, her face a perfect, tragic mask of maternal pride. I watched Cormac, the generous host, the beaming uncle, holding court, telling stories, utterly unaware of the guillotine that was about to fall. And I watched Rowan, my son, surrounded by his friends, on the threshold of his life, happy, confident, and completely, blissfully ignorant. At 6 o'clock, as the sun began to dip towards the western hills, I went to the specially set-up bar and retrieved the 30 bottles of the Cuvée Rowan. I had opened them an hour earlier, allowing them to breathe, to open up, to prepare to tell their story. I took the microphone from the band leader. A hush fell over the crowd. It was time for the father's toast. I stood before them, a single, dark bottle in my hand, the bottle I had reserved for the toast itself. The faces of my friends, my family, my wife, my son, and my son's father all turned towards me. They were all smiling, expectant. The silence was absolute. The stage was set. The cork was about to be pulled. The microphone felt heavy in my hand, a cold metallic weight. The faces of the 100 or so guests were a blur, a sea of smiling, expectant masks. The only faces that were in sharp, clear focus were theirs. Isolde, standing beside Rowan, her hand on his arm, her smile a brittle, perfect piece of porcelain. Cormac, standing just behind them, a proud, proprietary look on his face, the look of a man who owned all that he surveyed. And Rowan, my son, his face open, happy, and full of a love and trust for me that was about to be put to the most brutal test imaginable. I cleared my throat. The sound was unnaturally loud in the sudden deep silence of the garden. "Thank you all for being here," I began, my voice steady, clearer than I had expected it to be. "To celebrate this day, the day my son, the day Rowan, becomes a man."
I raised the bottle I was holding. The dark, ruby liquid inside seemed to absorb the golden late-afternoon light. "Some of you know the story of this wine," I continued, my gaze sweeping across the crowd and then settling for a moment on my wife. "The day Rowan was born, I set aside the best grapes of that year's harvest. I wanted to create something that would grow and mature alongside him, a story in a bottle, a testament to the year he came into our lives. For 18 years, this wine has been sleeping in my cellar, waiting, just like we have all been waiting, watching Rowan grow from a boy into the fine young man he is today." I paused. I let the words hang in the air. It was a beautiful speech, a perfect, loving, fatherly tribute. I saw Isolde relax, just slightly. A wave of relief seemed to wash over her. This was the speech she had been hoping for, the speech she had been dreading. This was the safe version. But we were not safe. "A wine," I said, my voice dropping a little lower, a little more intense, "is a truth. It is the truth of the soil, of the sun, of the rain, of a single specific season. You cannot lie in winemaking. The grape does not lie. The earth does not lie. The final product, the wine in the glass, is the unspinnable, uneditable, undeniable truth of its origin, its terroir." I looked directly at Rowan now. "And you, my son, are like this wine. You are a product of a specific time and a specific place. You are a product of a unique and powerful terroir. And today, as you become a man, you deserve to know the full, complex, and unspinnable truth of your own story, the truth of your origin." The word origin hung in the air. The atmosphere in the garden shifted. The smiles on the faces of the guests became a little more fixed, a little more uncertain. I saw a flicker of pure animal panic in Isolde's eyes. Cormac was still smiling, but his smile was now one of polite confusion. He thought this was just my strange winemaker's poetry. I took a deep breath. The moment had arrived. "The story of this vintage, the story of the year you were born, Rowan, has always had a missing ingredient, a secret element to its terroir that has been kept silent for 18 years. The story has always included a good, kind, and incredibly generous neighbor, a man who helped a young, struggling family buy the land that would become their home, their life, a man who became a mentor, a friend, an uncle, a man without whom none of this would have been possible." I turned my gaze, slowly, deliberately, away from Rowan, and I fixed it on Cormac. "And today, I think it is finally time that we all raise a glass and thank that man, not just for his neighborly generosity, but for his truly profound and truly paternal contribution to our family." The silence was no longer silent. It was a deafening, screaming void. The word paternal landed like a stone, shattering the perfect, glassy surface of the afternoon. Cormac's smile dissolved as if it had been splashed with acid. His face went from a healthy, sun-kissed tan to a pale, sickly gray. Isolde made a small, strangled sound, like a dying bird, and her hand flew to her mouth, her knuckles white.
Rowan just stared at me, his face a mask of utter, complete, and uncomprehending shock. He looked from my face to his mother's and then to Cormac's. And in that moment, in the terrible, naked truth of their expressions, he saw it. He saw the story. "The truth, Rowan," I said, my voice now a gentle, almost sorrowful whisper directed only at him, "is that I am the man who has had the profound privilege of raising you. I am the man who loves you more than my own life. I am your father. But the man who gave you your life, the man whose blood runs in your veins, is Cormac." I did not need to say anything else. The demolition was complete. The structure of our shared lie collapsed on itself in a cloud of silent, choking dust. The rest was just the inevitable messy aftermath. Someone in the crowd gasped. Someone else swore under their breath. People began to murmur, to look at each other, their faces a mixture of horror, pity, and a kind of prurient, scandalized excitement. Isolde simply crumpled. She sank to the ground, her body racked with silent, convulsive sobs. A few of her friends rushed to her side. Cormac was frozen, a statue of a man, his face a grotesque mask of disbelief and a dawning horrified guilt. He looked at Rowan, and in his eyes, for the first time, I saw not the pride of a benevolent uncle, but the terrified, pleading panic of a newly discovered father. The party, of course, was over. The guests began to leave, melting away in small, whispering groups, averting their eyes, not wanting to be witnesses to the carnage. They were fleeing the scene of a crime, the crime of a truth that had been left to fester for too long. In the end, there were only 4 of us left in the beautiful ruined garden. Me, Isolde, who was being helped to a car by a friend, Cormac, who was still standing, rooted to the spot, a man who had just had the entire foundation of his comfortable, unexamined life ripped out from under him, and Rowan. He had not moved. He had not cried. He was just standing there, in the wreckage of his own 18th birthday, his face pale, his eyes fixed on me. The look in them was not anger. It was not hatred. It was a look of profound, devastating, and heartbreaking betrayal. I walked over to him. I ignored the other 2. They were ghosts now, irrelevant to the only thing that mattered.
I stood in front of my son. "He may be your father, Rowan," I said, my voice quiet, my heart breaking with every word. "But I am your dad. That has never been a lie, and it will never change." He looked at me for a long, silent moment. Then he turned and he walked away. He did not run. He just walked with a slow, deliberate pace out of the garden, down the long driveway, and away from the ruins of the life he had thought was his. I was left alone, standing in the middle of a party that had become a funeral. The Cuvée Rowan, the 30 beautiful, perfect bottles of it, sat on the bar, unpoured, untasted. The story had been told. The truth was out. And it had, as I had always feared, destroyed everything. The days that followed were a quiet, hollowed-out aftermath. Isolde left. She went to stay with her sister, and she did not come back. Cormac disappeared into his estate, a recluse behind his own high walls. The vineyard, my sanctuary, felt silent and empty. The earth itself seemed to be holding its breath. Rowan was gone for 3 days. His phone was off. My own private hell was filled with the terrifying, vivid images of what might have happened to him. On the 4th day, he came home. He walked into the kitchen where I was sitting, staring into a cold cup of coffee, and he sat down opposite me. He looked tired. He looked older. "I went to see him," he said, his voice flat. "Cormac." "Okay," I said. "He's a mess," Rowan continued. a note of something that was not quite pity, but a kind of weary, clinical observation in his voice. He tried to explain. He tried to apologize. He wants to be a father now. "What do you want?" I asked, my own voice a whisper. He looked at me, and his eyes were clear. "I want to know why," he said. "Why did you wait? Why did you let me live a lie for my entire life?" And so I told him. I told him the story from my side. I told him about the hospital room, about the choice I had made to protect a 7-year-old boy. I told him about the long, silent years of my own pain. I did not ask for his forgiveness. I did not ask for his understanding. I simply gave him the truth, the final missing piece of his terroir. He listened in silence. When I was finished, he just nodded slowly. He stood up. He walked around the table, and he put his arms around me. He held me and I held him, my son, and we both wept. We wept for the lie, for the lost years, for the pain, for the strange, terrible, and unbreakable love that was the only true thing left standing in the wreckage. Our life now is different. It is quieter. It is more honest. The future is an unwritten page. Rowan has a tentative, awkward relationship with Cormac. He has not seen his mother. Our own relationship, his and mine, is being rebuilt, piece by piece, on the hard, solid, and sometimes painful ground of the truth. The other night, he came into the cellar. He picked up one of the dusty, forgotten bottles of the cuvée Rowan. "So," he said, a small, sad smile on his face, "are we ever going to try this stuff?" I looked at the bottle, at the story of the lie that I had so carefully crafted. "No," I said, "I think we've had enough of that vintage." I took the bottle from his hand and placed it back on the rack. I was thinking, this year's harvest looks promising. Maybe we can make a new wine, a new story, together. And as I looked at my son, the man he had become, I knew that our terroir was finally, after a long and bitter season, ready to produce something true. Thank you for tuning in to Reddit Whispers. We've all faced moments when everything felt broken. What was your turning point? Leave it in the comments, because your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now.